What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to my Lightroom tutorial series. This is video number 6, and in today's video I am going to be talking about how you can send your photo from Lightroom into Photoshop and then send it back from Photoshop to Lightroom. So round-tripping the photo from Lightroom to Photoshop and back to Lightroom. So there are a few reasons why you maybe want to send your photo to Photoshop from Lightroom. It could be that there's a part of your photo, say you've got a person in your photo or some kind of object that you want to remove, or you need to do some finer detail adjustments that Lightroom just can't handle. These are the kind of things that Photoshop can handle. Now, let me just preference this video by saying this is not a Photoshop tutorial in the sense that I'm not really going to be going through and showing you guys how to do different things in Photoshop. I really just want to show you guys how you can get your photo from Lightroom to Photoshop and then back. This is something I actually spent a long time trying to figure out when I started taking photography a little bit more seriously and started using Photoshop a lot more seriously, because I do see that Photoshop is a admittedly much more powerful editor than Lightroom, especially if you want to have really fine control and be able to do things like content-aware fill and all of those other sorts of things that that Lightroom, I should say, is not very good at doing. So, for today's video, we are going to be using this picture that I shot out in a local open space in Colorado, not too far from Colorado Springs, actually. And I'm going to use this photo to demonstrate how to round trip from Lightroom to Photoshop and back. So as you can see over here in the adjustments panel, I've done some adjustments to this photo. I've made a few tweaks here and there, added some gradients and some other adjustments. And maybe there's a few things to this photo that I want to do to it that I know that Lightroom can't handle, but I know that Photoshop can. So to send it over to Photoshop, I'm going to come down here to the film strip, right click on the photo, and then come up here to edit in. And then at this pop-out window you see, we have a few different options here to send it somewhere else. Obviously, we are going to send it to edit in Adobe Photoshop 2020. There's also the option to open it as a smart object in Photoshop. I'm not going to get into this in this video. That might be something down the pipeline I can work on. Today I am just going to be talking about round tripping to Photoshop and back. So we are going to just click on Edit in Adobe Photoshop 2020. And we've got Photoshop launching here. This could take just a minute. And as you can see, we have Photoshop opening up, and it's going to go through the process of reading the raw data from that photo, because like I said in a few videos, I import my photos into Lightroom as raw photos to work on them from there. So when I open it up from Lightroom into Photoshop, Photoshop has to read that raw data. So it takes just a split second for it to read that data and bring it into your workspace here. So I am just going to skip ahead here. I'm going to do a few little edits to this photo, and then I will show you guys how to send this back to Lightroom. Alright guys, so if you look down here in my layers panel in Photoshop, you can see I've done just a few adjustments to this photo. Mostly I've just been playing with the color contrast and some light and dark contrasting just to give this photo a little bit more punch, just a little bit more accentuation in the clouds and in the rocks and in the texture here in the shadows. For the purposes of this video, I'm not really going to get into all of the adjustments I did. You can see here I've been using Greg Ben's Lumenzia panel to do some pretty simple just contrast adjustments and some dodging and burning and a few adjustments to the color of the photo, mostly just to bring out that sense of contrast in the photo. So to send this photo back to Lightroom, all you have to do is very simply hold Control or Command if you are on a Mac, and then hit S. And Photoshop will save the photo. And as you guys probably saw down here in the corner, we had that little progress bar that was moving forward. And now when we flip back over to Lightroom, as you can see, we have generated, and it's taking a second here to fill into the film strip, but as soon as it does that, you will be able to see that we now have a second copy of our photo, of this rock photo, in Photoshop. Now, I'm just going to swap in between really quickly, and as you guys can see, I did just some very minor adjustments in Photoshop just to bring out some real difference in the contrast of the photo. Again, this is stuff that Photoshop can handle that Lightroom isn't as good at. So now we have a second copy of our photo in Lightroom. It couldn't be more simpler, guys. Hold Control or again Command if you are on a Mac, and then hit S, and Photoshop will save the edits that you have done and round trip it back into Lightroom. And then from there, you can do whatever else you want to do with the photo, export it, do a few more adjustments in Lightroom, whatever you want to do, and you are good to go there. Something I want to bring to your guys' attention, as you can see down here, we have the file name and extension. And down here, instead of having it say CR2, meaning it's a Canon RAW file, we now have a TIFF file. Photoshop doesn't have the ability to save the file back into Lightroom as a Canon RAW file or whatever RAW file you have depending on your camera. If it's a Nikon or a Sony, it's going to be different RAW file extension than a Canon, obviously. But yeah, Photoshop will send it back to Lightroom as a TIFF file, and this is pretty close to a DNG or a RAW file. It's still a very large file format, lots of data. This is just how Photoshop will send it back to Lightroom. Now, there's one other thing I want to talk about with round tripping back from Photoshop to Lightroom, if you've sent a photo from Lightroom to Photoshop. If you decide that you're not happy with the edit, it still needs a little something, and you go back to Photoshop, let's just say, for example here, I decide I want to add just a tiny bit more contrast to the photo overall, and I do just a quick little levels adjustment just to maybe exaggerate the contrast of this photo, and I want to send it back to Photoshop. If you hold Control or again Command if you're on a Mac and then press S, you see it's saving it here. If you make any additional adjustments and you round trip it back to Lightroom, those edits will save over the TIFF file that got sent back to Lightroom the first time, and they will be there in the file that you sent back the first time. So don't worry that you're going to maybe have multiple files sent back. Photoshop won't do that to Lightroom. What it'll simply do, like I said, it'll just save over the first TIFF file that you sent back, and you are good to go there. So guys, I hope that was a instructional little piece of information there on how you can send a photo from Lightroom to Photoshop and do some adjustments and then send it back. It's a really simple process. It's really helpful. It's a great way to utilize both programs. If you found this video helpful, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not already. Thanks for clicking on the video, guys, and I will see you in the next one.